She was just another traveler at the boarding gate until a gate agent brazenly tore her passport in two, right before everyone's eyes. But what they couldn't possibly know was that she wasn't merely a passenger. She was a top-tier federal investigator. And what unfolded next? It sent shockwaves throughout the entire airline industry. Stick with this narrative. You won't believe how it concludes. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness isn't just a tale. It's a powerful testament to the quiet strength and unwavering pursuit of justice in places often overlooked. If this is your first visit, I warmly invite you to share your viewing location in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, challenge your perspective, or spark contemplation, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. We amplify voices that deserve to be heard every single day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's dive into the story. The comforting roar of jet engines overhead was almost a lullaby to Dr. Leona Gray. After 2 intense weeks immersed in one of the most highly classified aviation security operations of her career, the bustling chaos of Los Angeles International Airport felt surprisingly mundane. Yet, beneath the bright fluorescent lights and endless queues of travelers, a storm brewed within her, a tension she could almost taste. She just didn't realize how close it was to breaking. Leona was intimately familiar with secrets. As a senior field investigator for the Federal Aviation Administration, her life was a constant cycle of assumed identities, encrypted documents, and missions known only to an elite few. The operation she had just completed in Houston, codenamed Project Skylock, had pushed her limits in unexpected ways. It was supposed to be a routine systems audit. Instead, it had nearly exposed a foreign breach of the FAA's cybersecurity framework. She was the one who single-handedly thwarted it from within the very terminals that millions traverse daily. Now, with her assignment complete, she yearned to disappear back into civilian anonymity. Her current disguise was simple: gray joggers, a faded Spelman College hoodie, and well-worn sneakers. Her dreadlocks were pulled back into a neat bun. To the outside world, she was just another weary traveler with a laptop and a backpack, heading home. But internally, Leona was a live wire. There was an unusual atmosphere in the terminal that morning. A palpable heaviness and underlying tension, like the calm before a lightning strike. Perhaps it was the news flickering on the monitors, a shooting in another state, escalating political rhetoric, or perhaps it was simply her instincts, honed over years of discerning danger where others saw none. She moved through the terminal with a quiet, scanning precision, her first-class ticket the only indulgence she permitted herself, a small nod to dignity after 2 weeks of pretending to be someone she wasn't. As she approached Gate 47B, her gaze fell upon the agent at the podium, a middle-aged white woman with tightly clipped blonde hair, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. Leona noted the rigid jaw, the narrowed eyes, the practiced attachment of someone who had built a career on making others feel insignificant. She also observed the stark contrast when a white man in a business suit inquired about his seat. The agent's smile was immediate, practiced, and warm. Moments later, when a South Asian woman in a sari approached, the smile vanished, and the agent's voice dropped to a tone bordering on frosty. Leona mentally logged the interaction without conscious thought. It was part of the job, part of who she was. Still, she reminded herself, not today, not here. You're off the clock. She settled into a corner of the gate area, strategically choosing a spot that offered a full view of the room. She pulled a paperback novel from her backpack, but her eyes repeatedly drifted to the gate agent, who now stood at her podium, scanning boarding passes with the demeanor of a warden checking prison IDs. It was then that something shifted. A Latino teenager, no older than 16, approached with his boarding pass. He appeared anxious, clutching a backpack that seemed disproportionately heavy for his frame. The agent scrutinized his ID, then his face, then back to the ID. A flicker of disdain crossed her expression. "This doesn't look like you," she stated flatly. The boy mumbled a response. The agent shook her head. "You're not boarding this flight until I get a supervisor to verify this. Step aside." A tremor ran through the boy's hands as he moved to the side, his eyes starting nervously. No one intervened. No one uttered a word. Leona felt her jaw clench. She closed her book. This wasn't supposed to be her battle. Not today. But it never began with monumental events. It never started with screaming headlines or viral videos. It began with subtle humiliations, quiet dismissals, with the insidious way power manifested in the hands of those who believed they were beyond challenge. The final boarding call echoed through the terminal. Leona rose. As she approached the counter, the agent barely glanced up. Leona placed her digital boarding pass on the scanner and presented her U.S. passport. The agent froze. A passport for a domestic flight? Her voice was sharp, almost incredulous. Leona offered a small smile, maintaining an even tone. It's my primary form of federal ID. It's valid. The agent didn't respond. Instead, she took the passport, turning it in her hands as if it were contraband, and then did something that would irrevocably alter everything. She held it up to the light, squinted, and muttered, "This picture doesn't even look like you." Leona didn't flinch. "It's 5 years old. It's me. I'm just funnier." The agent retorted, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look happier here. Less entitled." That word struck harder than a physical blow. Leona felt every muscle in her body coil. She could feel the eyes behind her, passengers waiting, watching, suddenly captivated by the outcome of a scene they didn't comprehend. The agent's voice dropped to a whisper, yet it carried. "Let me guess. Doctor of Sociology, Gender Studies?" Leona spoke calmly, clearly. "Aeronautical Engineering, Ph.D." A flicker of surprise, then something darker. "Right," the agent said, stepping back. "Well, I think I'll hold on to this. Something about it doesn't feel right." She scrutinized Leona from head to toe, the hoodie, the sneakers, the color of her skin. And then, without warning, she tore the passport in half. A sound, so sharp and jarring, silenced the entire gate. Like paper, but more than paper. It was the sound of something sacred being desecrated. In that moment, the agent believed she had triumphed. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the woman she had just attempted to humiliate wasn't merely another black traveler with a passport. She was the federal architect of the very policies that governed that terminal. And she had just been given every reason to unleash the full extent of her power. The sound of tearing paper shouldn't have possessed the power to silence an entire terminal. Yet, as the two halves of Leona Gray's passport drifted onto the counter like fallen feathers, a wave of stunned disbelief rippled through Gate 47 via LAX. It wasn't merely a passport that had been destroyed. It was an identity, a lifetime of hard-earned credibility, a symbol of belonging. And it had been ripped apart in an instant by someone who presumed they could. Maggie Talbot, the gate agent with rigid blonde curls and even more rigid judgments, seemed oblivious to the seismic shift in the atmosphere. She stood with arms crossed, her face radiating smug self-satisfaction, her voice loud enough to carry to the rows of waiting passengers. "It just didn't add up," she declared, glancing at Leona's sneakers and Howard University sweatshirt as if they were irrefutable proof of fraud. But Leona didn't flinch. She didn't yell. She didn't weep. She simply stood still, composed, her eyes fixed not on Maggie, but on the torn passport, a document she had carried across continents, through complex negotiations and into secure hangars. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her jaw didn't tighten. But the air around her began to hum with an energy far more unsettling than mere outrage. It was the quiet composure of a woman who had navigated bureaucratic infernos and borne the weight of national security, and who was not about to be undone by petty cruelty. "You have just committed a federal crime," she stated, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the stunned silence. "Under Title 18, Section 1543 of the U.S. Code, willful destruction of a United States passport is a felony punishable by up to 25 years in prison." Maggie blinked. The smirk faltered. The crowd began to stir, eyes narrowing, phones subtly raised. A young woman, barely 30, angled her camera phone perfectly, its lens fixed on the confrontation. Somewhere behind them, a child asked, "Why did she rip it?" And a parent whispered, "Shh." "I did what I had to do," Maggie snapped, but her tone was already cracking. It looked fake. Leona didn't take her eyes off the counter. "If you thought it was fake, Your protocol was to verify it through your scanning system. Use the UV check. Call a supervisor. What you did was unlawful, biased, and dangerous. I'm just doing my job. No, Leona said softly. You're doing something else entirely. With calm precision, Leona pulled her phone from her bag. One contact, one tap. A line picked up on the first ring. This is Gray, she said. Black Alpha Protocol. Active ID interference and document destruction. Gate 47, BLAX. I need TSA and Federal Airport Liaison on site now. Maggie's face drained of color. For the first time, genuine panic flickered in her eyes. Wait, what? Who are you? Leona didn't answer. She ended the call and looked directly into Maggie's eyes, now wide with dawning comprehension. You just made a mistake that's going to echo across this airport. Before Maggie could respond, 2 uniformed officers appeared at the jet bridge, followed by 2 men in dark suits, moving with an air of federal authority. The TSA liaison. Heads turned, conversation ceased. The whispers now had shape and direction. Who is this woman? What just happened? The taller of the agents approached. Inspector Gray? Leona nodded. That's the gate agent, she said, calmly motioning to Maggie. She tore my passport in half after an unprovoked and baseless challenge of my identity. That's the evidence. The agents didn't question her. They didn't hesitate. One began securing the area. The other donned gloves and meticulously picked up the torn passport as if it were a loaded weapon. The lead officer gestured to Maggie. Ma'am, we'll need you to step aside. I want to talk to my supervisor. He's been notified, Leona interjected. This is now a federal matter. Passengers began to applaud softly. Not loudly, not in celebration, but with the quiet reverence of people witnessing a reckoning. The woman filming kept her phone steady, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Maggie was ushered behind the gate podium, her authority dissolving as quickly as her excuses. Her mouth moved, forming half-words, half-lies, none of which resonated. She looked small now. She had mistaken the woman in sweats and sneakers for someone she could easily intimidate. But Leona Gray was no stranger to pushing back. Leona's voice cut through again, this time addressing the agents. I want security footage from all angles. I want the employee logs for the last 48 hours. And I want the gate's verification scanner reviewed. She never used it. The older agent, Agent Morales, nodded, already in motion. Passengers murmured. Someone whispered, she's FAA. Another, this is about to blow up. The tension that had coiled around the gate like a storm cloud was now fully unraveled. And Leona, she was ice. But beneath that calm, behind her poise, was something more powerful, a promise, not a vengeance, not a fury, but a sacred sense of justice for every traveler who had been spoken down to, for every person who had been profiled, patronized, or made to feel they didn't belong. She turned to Maggie one last time. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected the badge I carry, the people I serve, and the system you thought you could manipulate. You're not the guardian of these gates, Maggie. You're the breach. And with that, the line between traveler and inspector vanished because Leona Gray had just taken command. Not with a badge, not with a weapon, but with the undeniable truth of who she was and who she had always been. Beneath the gray veneer of the terminal lights, LAX Gate 47 seemed to dim in the wake of the confrontation. What began as a public spectacle had transformed into a crucible, forging something far grander than the torn pieces of a passport. Now, in the hush before the storm, something essential was being revealed, not just about Maggie Talbot, but about the delicate architecture of bias, deeply rooted in systems that prioritized appearance over identity. Leona Gray observed as FBI agents Morales and Chin systematically peeled back the layers of the offense. Morales meticulously secured the passport fragments into evidence kits, while Chin reviewed the gate logs, her voice steady as she tapped names, timestamps, and action codes. The physical dismantling of Maggie's behavior was mirrored by the unraveling of the assumptions that had enabled it. As the agents worked, a hesitant calm settled over the passengers. The low hum of conversation slowly resumed, laced with both tension and curiosity. Some wore expressions of vindicated shame, others relief. They had witnessed a gate agent's authority crumble, and they felt the tremor of their own unacknowledged complicity until now. Maggie, escorted away from the podium, stopped mid-step. Her posture stiffened, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. Gone was the swagger she had carried when she believed she was upholding protocol. A different presence had filled the gate, one of hard-won dignity and rightful authority. Her protests died in her throat. Leona remained at the gate, leaning slightly toward the counter as if offering a final courtesy. She addressed the agents. My scout of this facility for the past 72 hours flagged several deviations in document verification routines. This was not an isolated incident. I intend to hold this audit open until those protocols are not only reinstated but ingrained. Agent Chin looked up, respect evident in her eyes. Your credentials carry weight. We'll need your full report. Leona nodded. Her mission was larger than a single gate, larger than one disrespectful employee. It was about restructuring systems that protected some but excluded others. Declaring that protocols would be re-legitimized was merely the first step. While the federal agents finalized paperwork, passengers began filing back into the boarding area, not to board, but to process what had just transpired. Some looked at Leona with new eyes. The woman they'd ignored moments ago was now the calm pivot, holding justice steady in chaos. One elderly couple quietly expressed their apologies, their heads bowed in contrition. A family of 4 regarded Leona with gratitude. A few business travelers shook their heads, muttering about delays, but their haste lacked the certainty they'd shown earlier. Amidst all this, Leona began to feel the familiar weight of scrutiny, now aimed not at her credentials, but at the office she represented. She didn't win. Her calm exterior was the product of years navigating unseen dangers to protect the skies. Her presence wasn't a performance, it was a duty. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, in a secluded corner of the terminal, Maggie Talbot was escorted into a small TSA office. Her voice trembled as she attempted to articulate regret. I didn't realize, I thought. But the words tripped over the realization that her instincts had betrayed her. Agent Morales followed, his tone measured. You'll have a chance to explain. First, we document, then you reflect. Understand that appearances don't equal truth. That's the point of protocol. Maggie sank into the chair, her shoulders sagging under the weight of sudden accountability. She had been unmasked, stripped of assumed authority, forced to confront the lies she had told herself about power, about who belonged and who didn't. Back at Gate B, Leona watched as the audio from the scanner synchronized with the footage. Every microaggression laid bare, harsh laughter, sneers, throat-clearing dismissals. But Leona's focus remained forward. She anticipated the next wave, internal investigations, training overhauls, media scrutiny. Yet, in that pause, she also felt clarity, the moment when truth begins to rewrite reputations, far more enduring than anger can destroy. A voice crackled over Leona's secure line. It was Director Evans back at headquarters. Gray, good work. We're rolling this into Safe Skies Phase 2. Expect support on site tomorrow. She exhaled, her purpose sharpened again, extending beyond the passenger and the gate into the broader mission of reform, quiet, relentless, unsparing. As the gate area emptied, Leona gathered her belongings and prepared to head to the terminal office. She paused once more at the threshold, instinctively looking back at the officers lingering beside the torn passport. The gate felt emptier, changed, like a chapter closed but unfinished, a slate not wiped clean, but etched with new terms: accountability, vigilance, respect. Because in unmasking Maggie's prejudice, Leona had also unmasked something else, the possibility that every traveler deserved more than cursory scrutiny disguised as protection. That identity couldn't be measured by clothes or tone or department, only by verifying facts, by steady empathy, by following law over impulse. In that quiet aftermath, Leona walked away from Gate 47B, knowing she'd done more than stop a reckless act. She'd revealed the need for active, unyielding stewardship over systems meant to serve, not to judge. And for every terminal awaiting reform, there would be another inspector ready to point out the crack where bias could lurk, waiting to break through. She had started a ripple, and already its lightness touched corners she wouldn't even see. Beneath the veneer of routine airport operations, a deeper malaise thrived, one not born overnight, but cultivated in quiet neglect. The root rot had taken hold in Ascend's Atlanta hub long before Maggie Talbot and Leona Gray ever crossed paths. Now, as the federal audit expanded beyond a single gate, the fissures would prove more widespread than anyone realized. After Maggie was escorted away, Leona returned to a makeshift headquarters set up in a conference room at Hartsfield-Jackson. She surveyed a wall of monitor feeds, live footage from dozens of gates, maintenance bays, employee lounges. Each camera streamed a constant flow of faces, gestures, micro-interactions. She watched a veteran supervisor dismiss a black traveler's repeated request for wheelchair assistance, then pivot and greet a white family with effusive solicitude. She noted how gate agents were preferentially rotated, who got the cushy shifts, or who was reassigned far from view. Tag logs revealed fragmented training attendance. Some employees hadn't had required passport verification updates in years. Leona exhaled and turned to Agent Chin. This isn't isolated. The rot is systemic. Chin nodded. Let's expose every crevice. In the days that followed, Leona and her team delved deeper. They analyzed shift patterns, complaint logs, maintenance schedules, even Slack messages exchanged between staff. Hidden beneath its unassuming interface lay coded language, encrypted patterns of bias. A late-night message joking about planting the quiet ones at baggage traced to a supervisor whose team included multiple Asian American staff. Another referred to Middle Eastern names always giving us trouble, signed by a gate lead with an unblemished punctuality record. The root rot infected not just frontline employees, but the mid-level managers who lulled it into dormancy rather than uprooting it. Leona pressed the team. Systemic failure is usually deliberate in its design. It thrives when competence is secondary to convenience, and when profits matter more than principles. The subgroup's collusion, hidden until their routines triggered danger, like skipped pressure sensor maintenance and expedited aircraft rotations. The same culture that protected delayed flyers at all costs also subtly devalued passenger dignity. Her next target, Frank Miller, the station supervisor. Under hushed interrogation, tapes revealed Frank had knowingly covered up complaints, viewing them as customer drama unworthy of higher scrutiny. He admitted to encouraging agents to prioritize on-time departures over thorough passport checks. Customers won't complain if they get home, he mused. Thousands of flights left unmonitored, all in the name of efficiency. As the audit findings multiplied, Leona and Chin compiled a dossier not just of infractions, but of cultural erosion. They highlighted a boardroom directive from 2 years earlier that emphasized fiscal goals over compliance. They uncovered emails from regional executives praising Miller for hitting departure targets even as flagrant bias complaints mounted. The rot reached the top. But acknowledging it didn't stop at data. Leona sat down with maintenance supervisors who confessed they were incentivized to prolong part lifetimes under pressure from cost analyses. We feared being the ones who grounded flights, one mechanic said, his voice heavy with regret. They'd call you a troublemaker. So they stayed silent. Lives were placed at risk in service of numbers. As each new revelation surfaced, the ripple spread. Board members recoiled. Ascend's CEO called emergency meetings, scrambling compliance training and delaying press releases. Media outlets got wind of systemic bias and safety circumventions. For a brief moment, Ascend faced public scrutiny sharper than any fine. But the most profound resistance would come from inside. Employees who had tolerated the rot for years found themselves faced with a stark mirror. Some sent anonymous notes to Leona. I didn't realize until now. Thank you. Others avoided her gaze, fearing consequences. A few supervisors quietly revised training sessions to include anti-bias guidelines. The first seeds of organic, ground-up reform were being sown. Leona knew that excising root rot required more than enforcement. It demanded cultural replacement. The day before public release, she drafted a blueprint for Ascend's recovery, transparent audits, diversity-focused hiring panels, a whistleblower hotline with real protections, mandatory refresher training for all staff every 6 months, and a passenger-centered safety council. She included a provision for mid-course correction, a federal monitor stationed on site for 2 years, auditing changes in real time. On the eve of the report's publication, Leona returned to Gate 47B. Its marble floor gleamed under overhead lights. No boarding agents lingered. The silent, powerful stamps of federal oversight would soon mark every passport. She touched the gate counter, felt the history of small injustices lingering in its grainy grooves. "No more," she whispered. At a press conference the next morning at FAA headquarters, Leona stood alongside senior officials. The report was damning but constructive, holding Ascend accountable while offering a path forward. Headlines screamed systemic bias, dangerous shortcuts, but also lauded the new era of passenger dignity. Leona spoke on record. "What started with a torn passport exposed a system that forgot why we flew in the first place, to connect lives, not to confirm appearances. Change begins by facing the rot and replacing it with resilience." In the months that followed, Ascend implemented sweeping reforms. Gate agents, once invisible, now participated in empathy workshops. Maintenance crews logged parts usage daily and posted transparent reports. Whistleblower policies became law, and 80 complaints were filed, many valid. The airport hub was slow to change, but change it did. For Maggie Talbot, it began with shame but ended in growth. She became a trainer on cultural sensitivity, a living symbol of redemption. She helped revise gate protocols so no customer would ever be judged twice before boarding. On a spring afternoon months later, she quietly extended her hand to a black passenger who had been singled out, offering a genuine apology. The man nodded, smiled, and boarded. No cameras, no applause, just dignity restored. Leona looked on from afar and felt a quiet victory. The root rot wasn't eradicated entirely. No culture is ever perfect. But the first steps had been taken. The process had begun. In the long corridors of airline operations, a new current had started coursing. Where bias had crept under the floorboards, now vigilance took root. Where comfort had once trumped compliance, accountability stood tall. And in that incipient transformation, the flame of hope flickered brighter than any departure board could ever announce. Because real safety, real security begins not with steel scanners, but with hearts and minds willing to face the rot and refuse to let it grow. Justice didn't arrive with the clang of courtroom gavels or the splash of headlines. It settled like a slow sunrise, inching into places once hidden by denial. For Leona Gray, the final stage of accountability wasn't about vengeance. It was about making sure the story couldn't be rewritten, that every passenger, every worker, every executive understood what had happened and what would never be allowed again. 6 months after the audit, Leona stood in a congressional hearing room on Capitol Hill. The walls were lined with portraits of lawmakers past, but all eyes were on the high-resolution image projected behind her, 2 torn halves of a U.S. passport, its golden eagle cleaved in quiet violence. She took a deep breath, not to steady herself, but to summon the weight of every story still buried in silence. The events at Hartsfield-Jackson weren't the result of one bad decision, she said. They were the inevitable outcome of a corporate culture that valued speed over scrutiny, efficiency over equity, and appearances over truth. Her words didn't rise in anger. They carved through the room with surgical clarity. It wasn't just my passport that was destroyed that day. It was the illusion of a system immune to bias. Behind her, lawmakers took notes. Some leaned forward, visibly moved. Her report laid bare the consequences, financial, legal, human, but it also offered something rarer, a path forward rooted in reform, not retribution. She spoke not just of what went wrong, but of the quiet triumph since. How whistleblowers had finally found protection. How cultural sensitivity training had reshaped attitudes. How even Maggie Talbot, the gate agent who started it all, was now helping others unlearn their own biases. Justice wasn't Maggie's fault. It was her willingness to rise with new eyes. When Leona left the Capitol that afternoon, She didn't seek celebration. The victory wasn't hers alone. Outside, under the wide DC sky, a young black congressional aide caught up to her. "Miss Gray," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Thank you for not backing down, for doing what you did." Leona smiled gently, the weight of months of exhaustion and resolve finally softening. "I just did my job," she replied. But she knew better. What she'd done wasn't just her job. It was a choice to see injustice in plain sight and pull it from the shadows. In the quiet that followed, justice had not only been served, it had been seen. And sometimes that's how true change begins. Not with thunder, but with one voice refusing to be silenced. Leona Gray's story began in silence, in the quiet corner of an airport under the fluorescent lights that see thousands pass unnoticed every day. But silence would not be how it ended. Her journey from a weary traveler dressed in modest sweats to a commanding federal inspector standing before Congress is a reminder of what it means to move through the world with both strength and purpose, even when the world insists on underestimating you. In those first moments at the gate, Leona wanted invisibility. She wasn't there to prove a point or demand respect. She had already earned those things 100 times over. What she didn't anticipate was that her very presence, her blackness, her competence, her calm authority, would provoke someone else's insecurity. Maggie Talbot didn't just see a passenger. She saw a challenge to her small, unchecked power. And in trying to put Leona in her place, she unknowingly awakened a force that had spent her life preparing for this very moment. When Maggie tore Leona's passport, she didn't just tear paper. She ripped open a much larger conversation about racial bias, institutional neglect, and the dangerous illusion of authority without accountability. What followed wasn't just justice for Leona, but a cascade of consequences for an entire organization that had normalized misconduct for far too long. Through methodical investigation, Leona and her team exposed systemic corruption, racial profiling, falsified safety reports, and a pattern of abuse hidden behind customer service smiles and executive jargon. But this story wasn't about vengeance. Leona never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm, her facts, her presence, those were her weapons. She wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted reform, and she got it. Her actions not only led to arrests and firings, but to lasting institutional change. Policies were rewritten. Protocols were enforced. People in positions of power were forced to face the truth of what they'd ignored for too long. Most importantly, Leona's story gave voice to those who had none. The elderly, the disabled, the immigrants, the tired parents with crying children. All the people who had endured humiliation in silence now had a champion. She stood not just for herself, but for every person who has ever been told, directly or indirectly, that they don't belong. From this story, we're left with a powerful truth: integrity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It walks through the world quietly until it's called to rise. And when it does, it brings light to the darkest corners. So, what can we take from Leona Gray's journey into our own lives? We learn that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality, it is permission. That doing your job with excellence isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to fight to be seen. We learn that real power doesn't come from a title or a badge. It comes from knowing who you are, standing in that truth, and refusing to shrink when challenged. In our daily lives, whether in an office, an airport, a courtroom, or a checkout line, we will encounter moments, some big, some small, where bias, ignorance, or cruelty surface. In those moments, we must remember Leona. We must remember that calm is not weakness, and that being underestimated can be the greatest strategic advantage. We also learn that one person, armed with facts and unwavering composure, can spark a reckoning. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be aggressive to be effective. What you need is clarity, conviction, and the courage to act. Leona Gray's story is not just a tale of justice served. It's a call to all of us to do better, be better, and demand better from the systems that shape our lives. It reminds us that the fight for dignity and fairness isn't over. It's happening every day in small acts of resistance, in brave conversations, in moments where we choose courage over comfort. If this story moved you, If you felt the fire of injustice, the triumph of accountability, or the quiet strength of Leona's example, then help us share it. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one voice can matter. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring powerful, transformative stories like this to life. We're just getting started.